Hello, my name is Kelly and welcome to PlantPour. I'm going to give you guys 5 plants that are great for beginners. And the reason why these plants are so great is because they're budget friendly, low maintenance, disease resistant, and honestly, just durable. So stay tuned and I'll give you 5 plants that are great to start out with. This is a pothos. So pothos are great because they don't need a lot of attention. Now, when it comes to sunlight, even though it thrives in indirect bright light, you don't necessarily have to keep it in indirect bright light. You can actually keep it in a shaded area of your apartment if you have to, and it will still remain green and still grow. So when it comes to watering, I say just do the soil test. Just put your finger in the soil, and if it's wet at all, doesn't need to be watered. If it feels dry, go ahead and give it a thorough watering. Now, when it comes to fertilizers, you don't have to fertilize, but if you do want it to get really lush and green, then I would recommend fertilizing bi-weekly between the months of March and November. And make sure you grab organic fertilizer. The pothos is actually called devil's ivy because where I grew up in the South, it actually was growing really abundantly in the wild and people couldn't really keep a hold of it. So that's why this plant is so great for beginners because it's very, very hard to actually kill. Alright guys, this is plant number 2 and one of my favorites. This is the Pilea plant, also known as the Chinese money plant. Now this plant originated in southwest China, and they decided to call it the Chinese money plant because these flat green discs actually resemble jade coins. But this plant is also said to attract wealth and abundance into the household, so lucky for its owner. Also, this plant is known as the UFO plant because these kind of look like UFOs. So just like the pothos, I would put your finger in the soil for the water test. If it's dry, water him. If it's wet at all, I would leave him alone. When it comes to fertilizer, if you want to fertilize, but like I said, you don't have to, I would fertilize every 15 days during growing season, which would be March to November. Now, when it comes to sunlight, this plant thrives best in partial shade, which is why it's so great for apartments and houses that lack windows or a lot of sunlight. But we actually have ours in an indirect bright area, and it actually has been thriving pretty well there too. So that's why this plant is so durable and great for beginners because it's not very finicky when it comes to its needs. Something else that's really cool about the Pilea is that it makes a lot of these little plant babies, which is really fun and cool to see. Now, these little plant babies are known as physiparides, and you can actually take them out and create more plants from this mother plant, which is really awesome too. This is a peanut cactus. Patrick and I actually picked this cactus up in Tucson about 6 months ago, and we absolutely love him. He is actually heliophilic, which means that he loves the sun. So you want to make sure you have a sunny little windowsill to put him on in your apartment. Now, he is actually drought tolerant, but you do want to water him probably around bi-weekly. Once again, you want to do the soil test and just make sure that his soil is thoroughly dry before watering him. But, misconception, a lot of people think you just need to lightly spritz your cactus. You actually need to douse them in water when it is time to water. So I would put him under the sink and really let him get wet. But make sure you have some drainage holes at the bottom so the water comes out and he doesn't sit in a puddle of water. Now, another thing, a lot of my friends have killed their cactuses back on the East Coast by actually just planting them in soil. Cactuses need drainage, so mixing some rocks in there in the bottom and maybe even a little on top like this guy, just make sure that water filters through the soil properly and doesn't get them soaked. Now, when it comes to fertilizer, once again, definitely don't have to fertilize the cactus. But if you do fertilize, I would do it about every 15 days during growing season between March and November. So this is the paddle plant, also known as white lady or the flapjack plant. So what's really cool about this plant is that it does need a lot of sun because it's a succulent variety. But when it does get that sun, it's going to start to turn red on the tips, which is really cool because you can see that color change over time. Now, another cool thing about this plant is that it's cost effective. I actually got this little guy for no more than $2 at our local garden center. So it's really great if you're just starting out and you're wanting to buy budget-friendly plants. So when it comes to watering this guy, you could do the weight test, which is another way of figuring out if your plant needs water besides the finger soil test. So by doing that, if he feels more on the heavier side, that means that the soil still has a lot of moisture inside of it. If he feels a little lighter, that means it's time to water him, and I would give him a nice good water. This plant is really durable, which means it doesn't need a lot of nutrients from the soil. So I would just skip fertilizing altogether because this plant can survive on its own. This plant also attracts enthusiasm and happiness into the household, which is really cool as well. Now, last but not least, this is the peace lily. So the peace lily is a cool plant because it's pest resistant and disease resistant. It's also really great for beginners because this plant is originally from the tropical rainforest, which means it can adapt to partial shade or it can thrive in indirect bright light. Now, when it's in partial shade, you're gonna have this really thick, lush green. But if you put it in indirect bright light, it's gonna bloom these beautiful white flowers, which is really cool and unique. Now, when it comes to watering, I would make sure this plant has good drainage so you can give it a nice thorough watering once the soil is dry. Now, when it comes to fertilizer, I would fertilize this plant about every 15 days during growing season if you really want it to be really thick and lush. The one thing about this plant is I would not put it in direct sun because this plant will scorch on the leaves. So like I said, it would thrive best in indirect bright light or can survive in partial shade. So those were 5 plants for beginners. Those plants are great because they're low maintenance, great for people that are on the go, people who are new to the plant community. And if you want to be part of this plant community, make sure to subscribe down below and like this video, and we'll continue to make more content like this. And if you have a question, feel free to ask it down in the comment section below. Well, until next time, guys.